Christina and I'm a history teacher out of Southern Ontario, Canada.
Hi, my name is Heather Chalmers and I'm a geography teacher also at the same high school as Christina and in Southern Ontario.
So we're here today to talk about how we incorporate coding into our social studies classrooms. And so we're going to answer a couple of your questions to give you a better sense of how and why we decided to incorporate coding into our history and geography programs. So Heather, why did you decide to start putting coding into your classroom?
Well, I started to use coding probably about 10 years ago, but I only used it for making web pages because we didn't have the capability of drag and drop that we do now for web pages today. But I've been using it more so in the last couple of years for a few reasons. One, in elementary schools, a lot of our students are already coding. They're using coding in kindergarten classes. They're doing more advanced coding in grade 6 and grade 7 and grade 8. So they're already coming to high school with the basics of coding languages. So I'm trying to continue on developing their skills and integrating it into the geography classroom. I also think that it's really important for students to have those future-ready skills and to be able to have an understanding of computational thinking. So when we do problem-based learning in high schools, students have to break down really large problems to figure out how to fix them. And they can't figure out how to do that. So computational thinking is really good because it allows them to break it down into smaller steps. The other reason for using coding in my classroom, it really can help to promote social and emotional learning. So it can be as a great check mark. We can use it to kind of gauge how a student is feeling and responding. And a lot of it also is connected to student interest, that students have a keen interest. They see that their future workforce is changing and they want to have those skills.
Especially with that focus on STEM programming that's happening across like Canada, I'm sure, like in other countries as well. For me, mine's a little bit more narcissistic. I think the reasons why I started to incorporate coding, I didn't even think, like you mentioned, the HTML and using for building websites. That wasn't even something that I kind of considered as coding, so that's interesting. For sure I was doing that, but in terms of like coding in the sense that I kind of imagined it with, you know, building or manipulating robots and things like that, for me, because we're in the same school, I was seeing the kids coming from the grade 9 geography class and then coming into my grade 10 history class that I wanted to have skills that were transferable. So how could I kind of continue the pathway into the history program, building upon the skills that Heather had already established in the grade 9 program. So I was, you know, desperate to try and find a way to incorporate coding and incorporate those skills that they had already established in elementary, like you mentioned, and in grade 9, and put it into my history program so that they could continue using it and continue to build upon those skills and become experts even more so.
But I think that's important, and as teachers, as we learn how to code, we also build on our own experiences. So where we start off in the beginning stages of coding, it's complicated. But coding is all about languages, and once you learn one language, then those are transferable skills. So it makes it much easier as they go through the rest of their high school years to be able to continue on in that coding process.
And they could even apply it to like their tech program, or if they go on to other programs in university and post-secondary education, they can definitely apply what they learned from our classes for sure.
And I think what we think of coding, and we see it as a kind of a cute little game, we don't always see what happens behind the scenes in our everyday lives of how we actually use coding.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us what you did in your history program to incorporate coding?
Sure, yeah.
What was your entry point?
So I will be upfront and honest. I don't really know coding that well, and so for me, I was very scared to even just start. So I wanted to start with very easy kind of entry point for myself. So in my history class, the kids have to research decades. So as their big major project that they are responsible for doing as part of the curriculum is they have to investigate a particular decade in Canadian history. So for example, one group will be responsible for investigating facets of the 1960s. So one person in that group is looking at, let's say, equality. Now, the kids are still, I just want to kind of preface that the kids are still responsible for doing an essay and the conventional kind of historical research aspects. However, I also added in there an escape game. So that group that's doing all 1960s has to create an escape game based on that decade in time in Canadian history. And in that escape game, they are required to incorporate a microbit. And so a microbit is just a little, I don't even know how to describe it.
It's like a little chip. It's like the size, less than the size of a credit card or a debit card.
Okay, so this is what the microbit looks like. And so the kids would program this, and the screen here will light up with whatever they program into it. So some of the kids programmed in codexes, some of them programmed in games, some of them did like a true and false kind of question and answer. And so they had to program one of these things as part of their escape game. The second way that so from there, over the course of time, I realized that they were really invested in doing the coding from that aspect. So I decided to kind of expand it, and this past year, I stumbled into the National World War II Museum website out of New Orleans, where they talked about how they were having a robotics competition for, I think it was like a grade 7 or 8 classes. And they were responsible for coding robots to do various aspects of the D-Day invasion for the American troops. So I decided to apply that to Canada's invasion on D-Day to Juno Beach. And here at our school, we have a set of what's known as SPHEROs, and they're just circular robots that you can code to roll in a particular direction or execute different commands that you require to execute. And so the kids then coded the robot to take part in Canada's invasion of Juno Beach. So they had to have the robot do certain things, to have the paratroopers land, to attack enemy naval targets, to attack enemy land targets. And so they had to code that, and then we had a competition to see who was the fastest and who had the most accuracy on it. And so that was the second way that I had incorporated coding. And they were both like extraordinarily successful with the kids. They had a really good time. But I know that you do something that's a little bit more enhanced, so I wanted to talk about what you do with your grade 9s.
So I use Minecraft Education Edition, and with Minecraft Education Edition, you can build civilizations, you can build models, but one of the things that's really great is it's got a coder integrated right into Minecraft. And in Minecraft, you can have extra building going on while you're actually building somewhere else. So my students use coding to help them build faster. So I have a project, and I'm co-teaching it with a science teacher. And so we have our students build livable and sustainable communities. So they make energy systems, they design neighborhoods, they look at traffic management, they look at social developments, and they can all do that through using the code builder. The great thing about Code Builder is they use Microsoft's Make Code, which is a block code. So if you're just starting to learn coding for the first time, block coding is really great because you can just drag and drop, and you can run your code to see how it works. So you get a handle of the language. But it also, for those people who have coded more, you can toggle with JavaScript. So you can actually type in the code that you want to use.
Yeah, which is have, like, for the kids that are a little bit more accelerated, the JavaScript allows them that opportunity to kind of take it to the next level, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're basic like me, then the block coding is way easier.
Yeah, and so it gives that scalability, and that's one of the things you definitely want to think about when you're coding, that you're going to have students of all abilities. And the important thing as a teacher is that we have to remember that we're not computer programmers, so we're also learning alongside of them.
Especially as social studies teachers.
Yeah. So when I first started to use Minecraft Education Edition and block coding, I use block coding quite a bit, and now I'm using the JavaScript, so I can support my students more. And so that's one of the ways that I use it in the geography classroom. I also use MICROBITs with my grade 12s when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals. So one of the things that's been super important is looking at how we can help the world meet those Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the biggest ways that we see that with technology is looking at the idea about the Internet of Things and how we can improve living conditions through using sensors, for using it as security measures, for people who have challenges in terms of being able to have access to proper food sources, or they're worried about high CO2 levels. So we can have our students use design thinking processes, design something in 3D format, so something in Tinkercad. So this is a pretty simple version of what my students did. So this was created in Tinkercad and 3D printed. And then what they did is they had built a sensor. I don't have the cables here in with it, but the sensor would actually fit in here. So what it would do is this would actually register when there was a security issue, in particular around bathrooms for women in a couple of developing countries in our world. So this was a safety condition, and it was one of the things that they researched and found out that this was a real issue for people. We also had other students who developed sensors for collecting garbage in really poor urban areas in some of the least developed countries in our world. So these are things that you wouldn't necessarily think are part of the CWS curriculum, but as an extension to the research, and that's the most important thing that we have to remember. It can't just be coding for the sake of coding. You have to have a purpose for what you're doing.
You have to incorporate that curriculum as well, and the standards that your state or province or country puts forth, for sure.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So in terms of thinking about that, always think about what's the curriculum connection.
Yeah. Now, the microbits, just to kind of tell you where we got the microbits, Let's Learn Science was the name of the program, and they were offering Let's Talk Science. Sorry, Let's Talk Science came out to schools and provided them with the microbits. They provided them with like the kit that came with the USB attachment for your computer and the a battery pack as well. And you got 10 in the package, and it was sponsored by the Canadian government as part of the space exploration program. So there is programs out there within your communities that can provide you with these products for free sometimes. And they are relatively inexpensive. I don't think the microbits, even if you were to purchase them, I don't think these are particularly expensive on their own, and I think they come even in packs of 10. So it's definitely very user-friendly and very approachable and affordable for a lot of schools to get their hands on. And this is like you mentioned, can definitely be attached to things like a carbon sensor. It can be attached to even robots and other things.
It can make sound. You can connect multiple sensors together. The other thing as well with these microbits is it also works on a block coding as well that use Microsoft MakeCode. So again, super easy entry point, but definitely it's got the ability to scale up.
Yeah, that's what I like about these block coding things, because for the kids that don't know a lot about coding, it allows them to feel like they are experts themselves, because they're able to see what the potential is and expand that as they move forward. So I was thinking about the kinds of challenges that I ran into when I first started doing the coding, because I think I was like very much a newbie to the coding world, even though 1995 I was in grade 11 Turing program. We've come a long way, let me just put it that way. And so the challenges that I faced, the first is the hurdle of not being the expert. So as teachers, I think this is true whether you're a history teacher, geography teacher, or any science teacher, technology teacher, sometimes we're afraid to fail in front of students, right? And so for me, I don't know anything about coding. Like I joke that I still don't know what an array is. So I was afraid, like, what happens when the kid comes to you and is like, I don't know how to do this, like, array. I don't know what to do with this particular code. How do I answer that question? I can't troubleshoot it, right? And whereas, if they came to me with a historical question, sure, I could troubleshoot that. I know how to figure that problem out. So for me, that fear is the hurdle that I had to get over. But the actual result of that is they didn't need my help at all. In your classes, and this is not just within our classes, I think just in the general population, there are going to be kids who have had experience with coding, and they become your class experts. So for me in my class, I had a kid who was doing coding, and I believe he even has a YouTube channel where he codes and does code on as part of his channel, and he was troubleshooting and answering their questions, and he was almost like a second teacher within the class. And I have even if there isn't that expert level in your class, they still help each other to solve the problems, and they troubleshoot themselves. So my experience is useless. It doesn't matter, because they help each other. I just provide them with the opportunity and the experience. The other challenge that I ran into, and this was especially true when I was doing the D-Day experience, is time. You have to allocate the time to give them an opportunity to do the coding, to work through the problems, to do those kind of STEM investigations where they have to kind of execute their, let's say execute the SPHERO to launch. Oh, it missed the mark. Now we got to go back and rejig it. That takes time. So for when I did I did it for the first time this past year, and that first time I thought it was going to take 2 days. By the end of the second day, they still weren't done all of the codes. So we had to move it into 3 days, right? And so as a history teacher, and I'm sure if you're a history teacher out there as well, you can appreciate the need for time, right? Like you have, in some cases, hundreds of years of history. For the Canadian history curriculum, it's 1914 to the present. So we have decades of curriculum that we need to get through. And, you have to kind of allocate your timing. So in some cases, I'm not spending 3-4 weeks on World War I anymore, right? I have to do it in 2 weeks, and we got to move on because I want to allow them these opportunities to do coding, and they're going to take time. So I have to make sure I pencil in that time for them. Otherwise, we're going to end the course in 1950 and never get to the present, right? So just being aware at the front end that you need to make sure that you have time available to allow these experiences, I think is really important for sure. And that is a big challenge, is the time, I think.
And I think I would agree completely. And I think one of the really important things is you're better off to overestimate the amount of time that you need because you don't want to be rushed in the process. That redesign piece is really important when they test their code. If it's not working, they definitely want, at this point they're very invested, so they want the opportunity to fix it to make sure that it works. The other thing that I would suggest to kind of tag on with using students as trainers as well.
Experts.
Definitely as experts. What I always do with my classes is I do a survey and ask them what are the skills that they have, and to not have a fear. It's not a critique. It's just I need to know what kind of support I need to give my class, because some classes need a lot more support. Some classes have more experts. Some have more beginners. So if I'm putting them into groups, that's often something I take into consideration. That I'll make sure an expert is in each of the groups.
When you have a class of 30, do you what would be your average of experts? So if you have 30 kids in the class, is it 10 experts or 5 experts or 2 experts?
So it's interesting because I've seen specifically a change in the last 2 years. So 3 years ago, I would have had 2 experts in the classroom. A year ago, I would have had 4 experts. Now, I'd say there's probably about 10 students who are at least novice to expert. And so that's definitely shifted. And so when we talk about students getting training in elementary school, we're really starting to see that feed into our high schools now. So what you remember as a high school student is not the reality of high school students today.
My teachers wrote notes on the board. I copied them on from a blackboard. It was and then when I started teaching, it was overheads, right? So now there's the kids are coding. That was not even a reality when I started teaching.
And as you start to teach as well, you'll see the same things, that what you learn now, it will change exponentially.
In 10 years for new teachers, it's going to be a totally different thing, and this video will be completely obsolete for sure. Do you have any other challenges that you run into?
I think the other challenge is often dealing with technical issues that are beyond our control. So if you're using internet-based resources, the Wi-Fi will go down, or there's a glitch in the system. Sometimes there's a problem that you just can't figure out. And for me, that's one of the reasons why I use Twitter a lot, to find the answers, or to find people who can help me find the answers. So I know a lot of people use Instagram. There's still a lot of people who are teacher coders who use Twitter, so you're best to be in both worlds. There are a lot of great Twitter chats around Scratch, around block coding, MSS MakeCode. So if you have questions, I know I post a lot about can anyone help me with, and I'll use specific hashtags, and people are great for providing suggestions or links to tutorials.
Yeah, and with regards to the technology and availability of those resources, I know for a lot of schools, sometimes you just don't have the money, or the school doesn't want to invest that kind of money. And sometimes it's about showing what the potential can be. So saying, showing the example. So going to your principal with video footage from another school that's doing something. Sometimes that can be the clincher for a lot of them. And I know for us, we got the MICROBITs for free, so that took care of it. So just being aware of those promotions that are happening. I know I spoke a little bit about the benefits that I saw with my kids, collaborating and sharing a little bit as experts. What sort of benefits did you see in your geography class?
So I think there are quite a few benefits that would surprise you. The first, students are super engaged, and they definitely, you see their inquiry process, you definitely see their thinking. They are great at collaborating. Often we think of coding as being a solitary, I'm just at my computer by myself, but everyone is working in the same purpose, trying to make the code to work. So I think that's really, as a classroom teacher,
and they're on task too.
They're on task.
Yeah.
It's so neat to see because there's an energy in the classroom. The noise level kind of goes up, which is that's actually a really good sign. So I think for me, that's a definite benefit. It definitely promotes higher order thinking skills, because trying to get them to decode what's going wrong in a program.
The troubleshooting process.
Right? And breaking it down into smaller steps. I think it also gives them an appreciation for the code that happens in the background that we don't think about. One of the things that I notice a lot in Minecraft is it's really great for helping students who are quieter, for students who are on the autism spectrum, because it gives them an equal voice, and it also gives them kind of a common language. And so I've definitely seen some huge benefits for some of those students in my classroom when they've been working on group work projects. And I've had some really great experiences. And I think the other really amazing thing that I've seen as a teacher is that students who might not succeed in their mind academically, so a student who may be at a level 3 and is constantly trying to push to a level 4, we've had some cases where kids are like, this is the thing that I see I'm successful at. I know more information. I can help other people. Like, this is the way that people see that they recognize the skills that I have, and that I'm just as smart as everyone else.
It's a self-esteem boost, for sure.
And to see that transformation in the classroom when they get that, you say, you know what, it was worth the extra time that we spent in class. It was worth the extra
sacrificing
time.
that, half of that unit of 141 or something.
And then me taking the tutorials to be able to provide that to my students. And I think that's something that you don't know unless you see it in the classroom, right?
You have to see it.
When you're kind of coding a game and you're remixing something, it's hard to see how it applies in the classroom. With the curriculum, but I think the biggest part is also that social emotional learning.
Yeah, and it's interesting, what I've noticed is that some kids that may not be experienced with coding, so they may be the beginners, they are like hungry to understand coding because they see it. I don't know where they're seeing it in their personal lives, but they are seeing it in their personal lives in some capacity.
Kind of feel like they're left behind.
Yeah, and they want to kind of keep up with the masses, and so they jump in feet first, and they are actively engaged, and they're teaching each other, and they're, like you said, they're working together, they're collaborating. Sometimes when you put them to work on a computer, they will get off task, and so they're looking up, whatever they're looking up on their computers. But with the coding, they're totally engaged. And then when you make it applicable to whatever it is you're learning, like the stuff you did with your grade 12s and sustainable development goals, when it's relatable to their lives, or relatable even just to the content, like relatable to, we just learned about D-Day, now like, oh, let me see all the challenges that potentially they ran into, it becomes real for them. Having to rejig the coding to try and make sure you get that precise landing for the paratroopers was just as important in 1944 as it is today, right? So they start to appreciate that precision that goes into even just an invasion in World War II, right? And for the escape game, you see how they are able to apply the historical skills that they've learned, right? So, I had teams who, had them incorporating stories about refugees or stories about, the October crisis, and it becomes, we need to experience history, and so now the coding is a bookmark to this greater historical thinking skill that they've now established. And so they're able to apply their history skills, their history knowledge into this new technological way and find a way to apply it in a kind of interesting and dynamic way.
I think, to tag on to what you said, I think the really great thing as well too is that we can now show this to them in professional careers in using history, using geography, that there are people who are using coding to bring history to life for people.
For sure.
We've seen all of that definitely with D-Day celebrations and connecting AR and VR together. We definitely see it in geography using artificial intelligence and machine learning to monitor habitats and biodiversity. So it's great that there's a real world connection, that it's not just, we're doing a little activity that has no relevance to life beyond our school walls.
Yeah, that's kind of an important piece.
Yeah.
Is that it has to apply to your curriculum. You can't just throw in coding for the sake of throwing in coding, right? It doesn't make, if you just had a whole lesson on coding in your geography or history class, it's not in your curriculum, right? But you can make it an addendum to whatever it is you're learning. So you're learning about D-Day, let's find a way to incorporate coding into the D-Day experience, right? Like D-Day is in the curriculum, right? So how can I, add in coding to make the experience of D-Day or the understanding or the comprehension of that historical moment more, invested and more interesting for the students, because that's the life that they're living with today, right? It's future forward, right? This is not only is this education, currently, and this is the direction it's heading in, the jobs are going that way. You mentioned about museums and even just analytics and the way that geographers in society are working. It's going to be required of a lot of jobs in the future, and so I can't sit back and say, let me just lecture all the time, and that's going to be sufficient for them to move forward in the world. It's really not. They're going to need the coding skills in the future.
I think sometimes the argument becomes with some students, well, I'm never going to use this outside of the classroom, and they may not be coders when they leave our classrooms. But what they are going to need to be able to do is they're going to need to be able to use computational thinking skills for future jobs. And really that's
collaboration skills too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, they call it being future ready, right? So I think that's a really important piece when we talk about coding. And if you're really trying to justify why are you using coding, that's a really big piece.
So you're a little bit more expert at the coding stuff, but I know that you didn't start that way, right? You kind of sought out various educational platforms and things like that. So how did you kind of get started in seeking out those resources, and where could somebody potentially find those resources?
So I never thought I would use coding in teaching high school, especially in Canadian World Studies, ever. I started with coding using HTML to change web pages and to change things in Google Earth because I had to. It wasn't a drag and drop system like we have now, because coding has changed over time.
And it's not website building anymore.
It's not
right?
website building anymore. But it's interesting, that still can come into play when you're trying to make some changes. I really started to see a change over when we were looking at how to incorporate gaming in the classroom and looking at problem-based learning. So I sought out opportunities, went to conferences, went to workshops. So I've gone to conferences and workshops with Teachers Can Code. Canada Can Code has some amazing workshops. Some are free, some have a minimal donation. The ones for teachers are free, and they're across our country.
Immersive Minds on Twitter is good too.
Immersive Minds on Twitter is great for looking at how you can use Minecraft in terms of full lessons. He teaches economics through that and refugees. So that's a fantastic source. Microsoft for Educators. I know there are some universities and some school boards who are exclusively Google boards. But I think one of the things that's really important is that you're versed in both Google and Microsoft. because of the options and opportunities. There are a lot of school boards now who are working in dual environments, but Microsoft has a platform for educators, and they have online workshops that go through all the lessons, have the tutorials, you get certificates, and the Microsoft educators are fantastic support for asking questions, and have some amazing tutorials and people to talk to. So that's definitely something that I would suggest. And I think we talked earlier about asking for help. I think we'll add a couple of resources or hashtags that you might want to consider.
We put in the description box below.
Yeah, you might want to consider following. Definitely Twitter chats is something that I follow a lot, because there are lots of things that I don't know. I'm not a coder, so sometimes all you need is an idea to spark something else. So you can take something, you can see, oh, well, someone did this type of project or coding project in, say, for example, a math class. You think, well, maybe I can incorporate some of those same elements. So sometimes it's just having that inspiration.
That's what I think, like for me, that's where I think I work best with that. Is I don't necessarily, if you're a Canadian history teacher, you can understand the struggle. Is trying to find activities and resources that are applicable to students today, that are engaging, that are beyond the lecture style. So where do you go to find specifically Canadian history stuff? Well, that's very difficult to do. It's gotten better, but it's still not quite where, like, let's say American history is, or world history. So for me, I go to, on Instagram, there's a lot of times where I'll see what an American teacher has done in their American history class or their world history AP class, and I can visualize a way to apply that to Canadian history. So just not being afraid to, if you're an Instagram user, to check out those hashtags that are out there, like something like Canadian history, or hashtags about American history, or hashtags about history teachers. That will kind of lead you to people that might be like-minded. You can even look for hashtags like coding or coding in a classroom.
Codemaker.
And that will certainly open up some doors to some teachers who are doing things in their classrooms, even if they are elementary teachers, right? Like the SPHEROs are heavily used in our board in the elementary program, and now I incorporate it within my high school program, right? So there's transferable skills that you can pick up on from the elementary programs, and you can even touch base with those teachers and see ways that that they're incorporating the technology, and maybe it might kind of give you an idea as to what you could potentially do in your classroom. Any final thoughts?
I think one of the important things to remember is that there are many different types of codes, from really simple coding languages, so that block coding, to really complicated ones, And I think it's important that you have an understanding, not necessarily how to code in all of those language, but to understand what are some of the options for your students. And again, we don't have all the answers. So it's about, how can we collaborate with each other, and do we know where to get the support that we need to help our students?
And don't be afraid too to ask your students ways that you could potentially include technology. So like, at the end of your semester, or the end of your teaching block, or whatever the case may be, is you can ask your students, like, where did you see a potential for more coding, or a potential for enhancement in technology? Because it may not be visible to you, but maybe it's visible to the students. And even just a Google form can provide you with that insight and an understanding of ways that you could potentially professionally improve as well.
I think just to tag on to that as well, I think one of the things to consider is that not all of your projects have to look the same. You don't necessarily have to get 30 projects that are exactly the same for one particular assignment. You can give students options as well. And students who love coding, who are game designers, they may want to explore that kind of options, and they can still meet all of your assignment expectations and curriculum expectations. So if you have that open environment in your classroom and it fits, then
the flexibility in the
yeah,
classroom.
that definitely can make a big difference.
We hope that this provided you with some insight into how to incorporate coding into your history or your geography classroom. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section below, and we'll do our best to answer any questions that you might have. We'll leave anything that we've mentioned, any links or tutorials or things like that that we are familiar with, we'll put in the description box. Feel free to give us a follow on Twitter or Instagram. I'll leave our handles down below as well. And if you like what you see here, feel free to subscribe. We'll potentially have some more videos for you in the future. So thanks for coming out. Bye.
Bye, thanks.